Hello everyone, this is Christy from MyScrapbookEvolution.com, and today we'll be working with Scrapbook Challenges sketch number 442 and 6x6 paper pads. So I've chosen Crate Paper's Maggie Holmes Designs. It's an older print, but I want to try to kill it. I've got some vellum and some cardstock and some 12x12 pattern paper. I'm going to use this as my canvas. It's a very bold print. And I've got this photo of my cat sitting in a drawer. She hopped in there while I was doing some laundry. I'm going to go ahead and mat the photo. When you're using busy prints like this, it helps to mat the photo so that it's a little more defined within all those pattern paper prints. Now, of course, this background pattern paper did not come with the Maggie Holmes Designs kit. It's a different print, but I felt like it really works with it well. Right now I'm auditioning some papers to see which ones will work for the corners. And because it's a little bit difficult to cut them with the trimmer, I'm just going to use my scissors and cut them down to the sizes that I think will work best. It's sort of a wonky, fun layout, and I'm not really too concerned about precise cuts. I think a lot of times we waste our time trying to get that very precise cut. So just relax, use your scissors, cut away. Now my goal is to leave a gap in the middle so that I can put a block. I'm following the sketch, so I want a block in the center to hold my photo. So I've got the papers here on the corners, but they're kind of getting lost in that background print. So similar to the photo, I'm going to mat them. I've pulled a pink color out of the pattern paper pad and found cardstock to match. And I'm also going to mat them on a little bit of vellum. The vellum will still add that definition from the other layers, but it's not as heavy as a full piece of cardstock would be. And I'll go ahead and do that with all of the photo corners. You'll also notice that I've been very strategic about the choices that I made for each corner. They sort of create an X pattern. You can see how there's one line from the green chevron to the other side and one line from the photo camera print to the other side as well. When you're working with a lot of busy patterns, you don't want to mix too many of them. You want to place them very thoughtfully. So these two prints will frame my photo, creating a little bit of repetition and making that X it will mark the spot in the center where my photo and photo block will go. Sort of bringing my attention into the middle of the layout. And I'm almost finished adding those mats. Looks like I need a slightly larger piece of vellum. Now if you're not sure you want to invest in a lot of vellum, you can get these little vellum pads at an office or art supply store. They're perfect for small accenting like this, and you can use the scraps for journal strips on other layouts. Now as I'm working with the canvas, I realized that there's parts of that pattern that I want. They have words and phrases, little designs, like you can see the star there. It says things like hi and authenticity is magnetic. I want to cut a couple of these circles out, and I'm going to save them to embellish either this layout or another one, and then you can see how the corners just cover it up. Now I'm going to layer in some chipboard. If you've watched some of my other videos or read some of my tutorials, you'll know this is one of my favorite things to do. It adds dimension to your layout. It's an easy way of adding in layers. And it's also very structurally sound. Now that center block is kind of a rectangular shape, and it has a strip through the middle. So I'm kind of auditioning the 6x6 pieces of paper here And I'm looking for one that contrasts nicely with that photo of my cat. I don't want something that's too similar to the pattern paper that I have in the corners. I want something just a little bit different. And it looks like this yellow is different. It pulls the yellow color out from the camera print, but it also contrasts with the cat photo nicely. So I've cut that 6x6 piece of paper into sections. Basically, one is 1/3 of the length and the other is 2/3. And I'm going to mat that onto the pink cardstock again, just to provide a little definition so it doesn't get lost with all the busy prints. I'm not going to mat these with vellum though. And I need to cover that gap. So now I'm going to test out different papers to see which one I want. And I've settled almost immediately on this floral print. I don't work well in floral prints like this one on their own, but using them in small sections is usually perfect for me. I can still discern that it's a floral print, but it's not heavily floral, heavily intense. I tend to lean more towards geometric prints. And I'm just sort of auditioning the spot where I want that block to go, deciding if I want something to go underneath the block to provide a sort of shelf. I'm going to experiment by cutting down a small piece of this chevron paper, but when I place it there, it's too heavy. It sort of pulled away too much of that X line that I wanted. It was just too much. And you'll notice here I'm gluing everything down, but just barely discernible, there is a little bit of stitching. I went off screen and stitched on those pieces. Now the corners are already down and it's not too hard to stitch across the corners, but for that block in the center, I'm not exactly sure of the placement. And stitching them on the machine separately allows me to move them around the canvas until I get them placed just so. To anybody who's looking at the layout, they're going to think I stitched it directly onto the 12x12 canvas, but that's not the case. And you can see me picking everything up and moving it around until I get it just right. I'm going to go ahead and place that. And now we're just about ready to start with the title and the embellishing. I'm going to start testing which embellishments might work, and again I've got the sketch to sort of guide me, but it's not a hard and fast guide. I can move things around, add things outside of the block, do whatever I need to do to get the perfect weight for the layout. And I've decided one thing that I can use are these rub-ons. Rub-ons provide a nice layer, but not necessarily a lot of bulk or heavy weight. And I do like to cut the rub-ons out of the rub-on sheet before I apply them. I've had too many cases where I've accidentally rubbed portions of the other section of the rub-on sheet that I didn't want onto the layout. It ruins the rub-ons, and then I have a spot on the layout that I have to correct. So I'm just applying these. There are phrases that say I love you, because of course I love my cat, and they're each in a different color. And I've cut the phrase grouping apart. There's one phrase at the top and then 3 on the bottom. And I'm just sort of doing that to expand out from that block a little bit. It's a way to add to that X flow that's on the layout where X marks the spot and the photo's in the center without being too heavy. You know, like that earlier, that chevron piece was just way too heavy. So now I'm going to work on the title, and I know that I want to use these 2 wood veneer words. They have little holes in them, and I can hand stitch, which will add some wonderful texture. So far we've got a lot of pattern, a lot of color, but not a lot of texture. Hand stitching always adds a bit of warmth. What you're going to notice here is I'm struggling to get the thread knotted just right, and then I'm using a needle that's a little bit too big, and you'll see as I'm wiggling it through that it's not going smoothly. A lot of times these kits come with needles that are too big, and they're dull. And because I didn't change my needle out, I broke the word. But it's not a total loss. I'm going to first try to glue it back together, and I'll set it aside and let it dry. Again, not a big deal. There's no reason to throw it out. I can figure something out with it. And while it dries, I will go back to working on the stitching. I'll work on the XO. Again, the pink is a color that I pulled from the pattern paper pad. It's not very prevalent, so it's still good to use as an accent color. And the thread will add that handmade warmth and love that I'm looking for in the layout. I've got a lot of busy color, but the pink and again the texture from the stitching is going to soften things just a little bit. Now you can get different needles, and you'll see here I'm stitching a lot easier. I've sped up the video, but it's going smoothly. I'm not fighting the needle anymore. So you can get another type of needle at any craft supply store, fabric sewing store, and any big box store that carries needle and thread. And you're looking for a needle that's thinner. A lot of times they're going to have more of a sharp end, which is nice actually for working with paper. A lot of embroidery needles are too dull, but that sharper needle will help you get through paper a little easier. So the stitching goes pretty smoothly here. Sorry, a little bit is off screen more than I intended. Sometimes I get working and I forget the camera's going. So I'm just going to set that aside, and I'm going to come back to work with hello again. Now I'm a little impatient and I inadvertently re-broke it again. Again, sorry, some of it ended up being a little off camera. What I ended up doing here, now that I've broken it, is to try to reinforce the back with a tiny bit of chipboard and glue. I've also carefully stitched so that the holes, when they aligned, pulled the two pieces that broke together. I just want it to hold enough while I'm stitching it. Once I can finish the stitching and glue it back down onto the paper, it'll be fine. Everything will hold into place. It's just getting that initial stitching onto the wood veneer. And we're going to keep on stitching through. You can see now that it's pretty well held in place. I used glossy accents with that little bit of chipboard. A lot of times glossy accents is my go-to adhesive. Almost done with the stitching, and then we can finish embellishing. I've pulled a lot of different embellishments, all with similar colors that complement the layout, but I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to use yet. I like to pull the embellishments ahead of time rather than search for them as I go. It's not as efficient for me to search for things as I go. I still do it occasionally, but not too often. So now I've decided that I'm actually going to switch the position of the hello and the X and O because the weight was too heavy on the bottom. Especially if I'm going to add my cat's name, Sweet Pea, it was going to be too heavy on that bottom right corner. So I'm going to layer in those letters, and I'm going to attempt to glue the word hello so it's kind of on top of the word Sweet Pea, on top of her name. And in order to do that, I needed to raise a couple of the letters up because they went off of the photo. And the photo's already raised, so you can see I just stuck a few pieces of chipboard behind those letters and I glued them in so that everything is raised up. There I am gluing in the word hello. So I have hello, Sweet Pea. And then we have XO for hugs and kisses. I decided I wanted a big heart in the center of the letter O, but it wasn't quite big enough, so I stuck it on a scrap piece of cardstock and matted it. Again, matting is an extra way to add layers. It's easy to do. And I've got a few other X's and O's that I can add in, and they're from the rub-on sheet. So I'm just going to scatter those around in a couple different spots, reinforcing that flow that I talked about before. X marks the spot, the photo's in the center, and all of these embellishments are going along that line made between the two camera corners. The two photos, the two corners with the camera motif paper. And I'm just adding in little jewels and sequins. None of these items is very heavy, which allows me to place them there. And you want to think about the weight of everything you put on it. If I put on some very heavy items, it might feel unbalanced. There we go. A few jewels and some sequins. I always like to make sure they're in odd amounts. I can't stand to have an even amount of jewels or an even amount of sequins. So I actually count them out as I go. I use the glossy accents again. It's very efficient with sequins and small items like the jewels or beads because I can get a very tiny dot of glue with the precision tip on the glossy accents. So I've already placed my scattering and I'm just gluing them down. And at this point you can make little adjustments. Take stuff away, add more stuff. Little bit of cleanup here, and I'm going to use a scrap to do the journaling. I love journaling strips because again, it adds a layer and it helps me use up those spare scraps. Cut those apart and we'll put them in place. I want to try to figure out where I can place them because just as you have a visual triangle of elements or a diagonal flow of elements, your words or letter phrases, even your journaling, can play into visual triangles and diagonal flow. And it was too heavy to try to keep a triangle going here, so I just kept it sort of framing the photo almost diagonally, one on top and a little bit of words and phrases on the bottom. So here I'm taking my pen and I'm just outlining the journaling strips a little bit. Adds a little more definition and makes it feel a little more finished. And this will complete the layout. You can see the full layout at myscrapbookevolution.com.